It was almost exactly 6 years ago, during the final presidential debate of 2016, that Hillary Clinton laid out an ominous warning about Donald Trump.
I find it ironic that he's raising nuclear weapons. This is a person who has been very cavalier, even casual, about the use of nuclear weapons. He's advocated more countries getting them, Japan, Korea, even Saudi Arabia. And that's why 10 people who have had that awesome responsibility have come out and in an unprecedented way said they would not trust Donald Trump with the nuclear codes or to have his finger on the nuclear button.
The good news is Donald Trump did not launch a nuclear attack while he was president. The bad news is Clinton's warning about his cavalier, casual approach to nuclear security may turn out to have been prescient. On Tuesday night, The Washington Post published a new bombshell report. It says that a document describing a foreign government's military defenses, including its nuclear capabilities, was found by FBI agents who searched former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence and private club last month. That's according to people familiar with the matter, the Post said. Those people familiar did not name the country in that document, but they did tell the Post that the page in question was not part of the materials Trump handed over in May and June. It only came to light in the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago in August. Now, NBC News has not confirmed the Post's reporting, but it builds on the paper's reporting from last month that, again, according to people familiar with the documents spoken to by the Post, the FBI warrant was motivated, at least in part, by a search for nuclear documents. And here's what we do know for sure from years of experience. Whatever Donald Trump says, the truth is always worse, and usually the opposite. When the first Washington Post report came out last month, he posted to his social media website, quote, "Nuclear weapons issue is a hoax, just like Russia. Planting information, anyone?" Then, when the heavily redacted FBI search affidavit was released, he said, "Affidavit heavily redacted. Nothing mentioned on nuclear, a total public relations subterfuge by the FBI and DOJ." The Post report came out Tuesday night. As of Wednesday afternoon, Trump had said nothing about it, though he did write that the 2020 election was rigged, his rally was huge, and that the FBI, quote, "took my complete and highly confidential medical file and history, plus personal tax records," adding, quote, "days of the Soviet Union." Trump just says nonsense all the time. The best response to that nonsense, if you are a Republican, is to either condemn it, yeah, right, or at least just say nothing. Don't try and go out and defend Trump's ever-shifting litany of excuses and justifications. That's madness. Listen to former RNC communications director turned never-Trumper Doug Heye, who warned on CNN last month that Republicans defending Trump after the Mar-a-Lago search were doing so at their own peril.
I texted last week with one of the members who went up to visit Donald Trump last week after we found out the revelations about the FBI visit. And I said, be very careful here, for your own political purposes, but also, more broadly, be careful, because we know two things about Donald Trump. One is when there's a revelation, 2 or 3 days later, we find out, gosh, it's actually worse than we thought it was. And the other is politically, Donald Trump doesn't give points. He only takes them away one at a time.
These were pointed truths that Florida Senator Marco Rubio probably wishes he had heeded before appearing on NBC's Miami affiliate on Sunday morning.
This is really at its core a storage argument that they're making, right? They're arguing there are documents there. They don't deny that he should have access to those documents. What they deny is that they were not properly stored. I don't think a fight over storage of documents is worthy of what they've done.
If only Rubio knew then that the Post would report that those storage documents include other nations' nuclear secrets, human sources of U.S. intelligence, and special access programs so highly classified that they are kept under lock and key, almost always in a secure compartmented information facility with a designated control officer to keep careful tabs on their location. It wasn't just Hillary Clinton. Marco Rubio is the same person who in 2016 said Donald Trump shouldn't be trusted with the nuclear codes. Today, that same Marco Rubio, who is the vice chair of the Senate Intel Committee, wants us to believe that Trump taking nuclear secrets that did not belong to him and keeping them in his unsecured resort home is all just a row over storage facilities. Look, we know that Republicans like Rubio are willing to undermine their own reputations for the sake of one Donald J. Trump. But now we see they're also willing to undermine national, if not international, security too. Joining me now to talk through this latest development is David Henderson. He's a CNBC contributor, a former prosecutor and a civil rights lawyer. And Wajahat Ali, he's a columnist for the Daily Beast and author of Go Back to Where You Came From. Thank you both for joining me. David, former FBI agent, now academic, Asha Rangappa summed up this whole thing quite well as she was trying to process it all on Twitter. And I quote, Trump planned to use the planted FBI documents about a foreign government's nuclear capabilities, which he declassified, to write his memoirs and display them in his presidential library because they totally exonerate him. Well put. Your reaction to this latest development?
You know, Mehdi, it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to draw the line between what's crazy and what's clever. We start talking about Trump and his administration. But something you've got to keep in mind here is that the Espionage Act doesn't care whether it's nuclear information. The Espionage Act doesn't care whether or not it's classified information. It relates to information regarding the national defense. And if you retain or disclose information that hurts the U.S. or benefits a foreign adversary, you're in trouble. Legally, the fact that it's nuclear information doesn't impact the charges that they listed in that warrant so much as it does impact storytelling, because at the end of the day, if you bring charges against Trump, you're going to have to walk into a courtroom and present them in front of a jury. A jury's going to care about mishandled information related to nuclear weapons.
So, Wajahat, David makes a good point about where nuclear plays a role in the legal side of things. Let's talk about the politics of this for the moment and the media coverage. I want to play to you a clip from Fox News anchor Dana Perino. She said this on August the 11th, hours before the original revelations about there being nuclear documents did indeed surface, and they seem even better now. Have a listen.
I don't understand how a document can be this critical. Like, unless it has, you want the picture, you're saying if it has a picture of Putin and Trump making out?
Yes.
Like, short of the nuclear codes being written on these documents in a locked behind closed doors, I just really don't understand how a document could warrant this kind of warrant.
Oh, the irony.
You know, there's a great line from Bourne Identity where the assassins look at each other and they say, look at what they make you give. Look at what they make you give. And I always thought about that when I see these Republicans bend over backwards, putting themselves in a pretzel, you know, betraying themselves, their morals, their identity, their values, their own statements. When Trump repeatedly and consistently throws them, the truth, the Republican Party and everything under the bus. And you think some of them would have some dignity, some of them would have some honor and say, you know, enough's enough. But they say, nope, we're going to ride Trump all the way to the end. Like lemmings, we're going to go all the way over the cliff with him, which was our prediction 5 years ago, is that he will continue being a reckless, selfish, a racist monster who will throw everything, including United States national security, under the bus in order to profit himself. And so what you're witnessing right now is the former president of the United States of America took highly classified documents that expose not only our national security and our intelligence officers, but also the nuclear secrets of a foreign country. He was repeatedly asked, Mehdi, this is what people forget, repeatedly asked, hey, can you please return the documents for a year? And he said, I'll look into that. And then also his lawyers lied about returning it. And then he accuses the FBI of planting the documents that he took and declassified. So follow that logic. But what's really troubling here is the national security threat, not only that exposes the United States to a risk, but also our allies. And you have to wonder also for the confidential informants and law enforcement officials, they potentially are also compromised, and also their assets on the ground are compromised. So if you're fine with treasonous behavior now, just because it's Trump, I want Republicans to stand up and say everything's okay. Even a traitor committing espionage, that's fine too, in order for us to make America great again. That's where we are, Mehdi, without hyperbole.
And just to build on your Bourne movie reference, which I highly appreciate, as you can imagine, I would say to our viewers, this is the equivalent of Donald Trump having the Treadstone program in his desk drawer at Mar-a-Lago, which would be crazy. That's the kind of human, intelligent stuff that could endanger many lives.
And
David,
unlocked, Mehdi, that's the worst part. Unlocked.
Unlocked. David, let me ask you this. Let me take you to a very dark place, which is, I want you to imagine for a moment that you are Donald Trump's next lawyer. He swapped through a bunch of lawyers. He comes to you, David Henderson. You're next on my list. What advice do you offer him? What defense is left to him now?
You know, Mehdi, that's a difficult question, because the only defense he has is really to throw me under the bus. And it's one that has made me afraid from the beginning. The smartest thing he could do, which he'd probably never be willing to do, is just say, look, saying crazy things is my brand. Everybody knows it. I say crazy things and I do crazy things. But if you watch me, every time I do or say something like that, I have a lawyer nearby. When I made that call to Georgia, I had a lawyer nearby. When I gave those speeches at the Capitol, I had a lawyer nearby. And I asked these people, is what I'm saying crazy or is it actually illegal? And they always told me it's crazy, but it's not illegal. And how was I supposed to know that Giuliani was going to ultimately be disbarred? How was I supposed to know Cohen was going to go to jail? I hired these lawyers to advise me, and I listened. Now, I think that's a crazy defense. But what I'll tell you is what consistently happens in a court of law, and you see this going on with DOJ right now, is that the people who play chess constantly underestimate the people who play checkers when you have to present information in front of a jury.
David, that sounds semi-persuasive to me. So be careful. We know Donald Trump picks his lawyers by watching them on TV. If he is watching Peacock, you could be getting a call soon. In the meantime, while David checks his voicemail, let me ask you this. Let's speculate shamelessly. Which foreign nation's top secret nuclear info did Donald Trump maybe have at his resort in Florida? What would be the most damning? France's, Israel's, India, Pakistan's?
I would say Israel, and what we've already seen is, let's not forget that the day after he fired Comey, remember he had the Russian foreign minister inside the White House, and he openly just compromised a top secret Israeli operation, blurted it out. Let's also not forget that Jared Kushner got $2 billion, pinky in the mouth, $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia into his firm. Let's also not forget that after Kushner visited MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the murderous dictator ruler of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, right afterwards, MBS did the purge where he consolidated power. And the first trip that Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and his administration took was to Saudi Arabia, where he still gives cover to MBS, took his word over the word of his intelligence agencies, did nothing and said nothing about the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And I want to always remind people that MBS bragged, I have Jared Kushner in my, quote, pocket. So if I was to just assume, I would believe he has Israel's nuclear intelligence, and one of the highest bidders and one of the people who's invested in Donald Trump and Jared Kushner is Saudi Arabia.
That is all speculation, but it's interesting speculation. David, let's shift topics to something not unrelated to what's going on with Trump and the FBI, which is his former campaign chair, his former White House advisor, Steve Bannon, is expected to be indicted in the state of New York this week for his alleged role in the Build the Wall charity. Talk about the significance of these charges, despite the fact that he received a pardon from Trump for the federal fraud case nearly 2 years ago. That doesn't apply here, does it?
It does not. And the significance of these charges, Mehdi, is twofold. First, it reminds me of something that one of my mentors tells me. One of the people who offices with me is an old school civil rights activist who actually marched with Dr. King at the original March on Washington. And he always reminds me, we used to fight tooth and nail to get into federal court because it's the only place we could get a fair hearing. And we wanted to avoid states' courts like the plague. And now it's the opposite. State court is a place where you're most likely to get justice, because you can't pardon people in state court. Also, you start talking about state court, you're talking about going to the state pen if you get convicted. And that tends to loosen lips. And you have to remember, people like Bannon know a lot more than what relates to their specific case. They start getting worried about going to the state pen, they're going to start talking, because what Trump is really doing, he's doing so many offensive things that we overlook perhaps one of the most devastating things that he's doing. And that is exposing our justice system for what it actually is. If there's something that really makes him dangerous, and it's hard to say this, he understands how the legal system in America actually works, not how we like to think it works. And so all of these rifts are just exposing that. And I think Bannon, when the information comes out, the question that's going to have to be asked is, why did this man get pardoned from federal authorities when he did what he's being prosecuted for in New York?
Very good question. Waj, last question to you, briefly. Steve Bannon's statement on this pending indictment, it reads, in part, the Soros-backed DA has now decided to pursue phony charges against me 60 days before the midterm elections, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. I can't read out Steve Bannon words, sorry. Let's focus on the words that I really care about. Soros-backed DA. Wajad, what does he mean by that? Why would he mention George Soros?
The Jews. He's talking about the Jews, and specifically, he's repeating a white supremacist conspiracy theory of the deep state and the replacement theory that suggests that Jews are ahead of a powerful international cabal using and abusing people of color, Muslims, feminists, and law enforcement to replace and weaken white folks. Now, in 2022 America, a white supremacist conspiracy theory that is deeply rooted in anti-Semitism is an open, fair talking point, and we don't even blink an eye. But the cost of this is radicalizing individuals who commit acts of terror against our communities.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you giving me this moment because we have to call out this rampant anti-Semitic conspiracy that Steve Bannon casually throws because, let's be honest, all Republicans now openly said this without any pushback. That's what we're talking about.